Right now, the roof above your head is eating money you will never get back. Every hour the sun beats down on those shingles, heat is being driven through the deck and into your living space. You are paying twice for every degree of that heat. You've paid for the roof that conducts it, and you pay again for the electricity that fights it. There is a device that costs $18 in materials and stops that cycle entirely, not reduces it, stops it. 1987, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association quietly removed a specific generation method from its community guidelines. And the reason they removed it has everything to do with why your electricity bill looks the way it does today. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I want to tell you what I found in a barn in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, 11 years ago. I had driven out to photograph traditional Amish construction techniques for a heritage documentation project I was running at the time. I expected to find old timber joinery. I expected hand-cut mortise and tenon work. What I found instead was a small cedar and copper assembly mounted at the ridgeline of a working barn roof. The barn had no grid connection. The farmer told me it had never had one. I stood there for a long time looking at that device. Then I went home and spent the better part of 2 years finding out where it came from, how it worked, and who had decided that most people would never hear about it. What I found is what this video is about. The average American household currently pays $1,140 per year for electricity. That is the figure published by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Over 10 years, that is $11,400. Over 20 years, it is $22,800. That money leaves your account in monthly payments that feel manageable. Written as a single number, it looks very different. Now hold that number, because it explains everything that follows. The reason your electricity bill is what it is comes down to a principle most people were never taught in school. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado has measured and published the fact that the average American residential roof receives enough solar energy on a clear day to power the entire home 3 times over. 3 times. The energy is already there. It is landing on your roof every morning without an invoice. The reason the modern electricity system captures almost none of it for the average homeowner comes down to infrastructure. Solar panels require inverters, permits, qualified installers, grid tie agreements, and in many areas, HOA approval. The system is designed to require a professional at every stage. That design is not accidental. What the Amish communities of Lancaster and Holmes counties understood, and what English rural families in the North Yorkshire moors had understood for generations before them, is that small-scale thermoelectric generation requires none of that infrastructure. It requires only a temperature difference. And a roof in sunlight always has a temperature difference. These communities did not arrive at this through laboratories. They arrived at it through decades of watching what happened at the ridgeline of a well-built roof on a clear summer morning. The ridge runs hotter than the eaves by as much as 40 degrees Fahrenheit on a standard pitched roof. They noticed that difference, and they started asking what that difference could do. This knowledge is not uniquely English or Amish. The ancient Romans used a version of this principle in the hypocaust systems beneath their bathhouses as early as 80 BC. They observed that heat differential between chambers could be made to do mechanical work. They built entire buildings around managing that differential deliberately. They did not call it thermoelectric generation, but the physics they were working with is identical to what that $18 device in the Lancaster barn was doing 11 years ago when I stood in front of it. The device is called a ridge-mounted thermoelectric generator. It is built from 4 components. The first is a bismuth telluride thermoelectric module, sold under names like TEC 112706 or the Peltier generation equivalent. It's available from electronic suppliers and online retailers for between $4 and $7 per unit. You need 2 modules for a basic installation. The second component is a copper heat spreader plate, 12 inches by 6 inches, 16 gauge. It runs approximately $3 from any plumbing or sheet metal supplier. The third is an aluminum heat sink, the kind sold for CPU cooling between 6 and 9 inches, costing $2 to $4. The fourth is 10 feet of 18-gauge 2-conductor copper wire, costing under $2. Total materials cost between $11 and $16. With basic connectors and a small charge controller to feed a 12-volt battery, you are at $18. The copper plate sits on the sun-facing side of the ridge and absorbs heat. The thermoelectric modules are sandwiched between the copper plate and the aluminium heatsink. The heatsink faces the shadowed side of the ridge or the attic interior. The temperature difference between the two sides drives a small but continuous electrical current. That current feeds a standard 12-volt deep-cycle battery through the charge controller. The battery powers LED lighting, USB charging, and low-draw appliances indefinitely. The one thing you must not do is mount the heatsink on the exterior. Exposed aluminium on the exterior side will equalize in temperature with the copper plate within an hour in direct sun, and the differential collapses entirely. The heatsink must face the cool side. That is the only known obvious requirement. Most people are surprised to discover that there are no moving parts in this system. No turbine, no pump, no fan. The conversion happens at the molecular level inside the bismuth telluride module. There is nothing to maintain, lubricate, or replace. The Mughal engineers who built the ventilation towers of the Fatehpur Sikri complex in India in 1571 used the same differential principle to move air through an entire palace complex without mechanical assistance. Hot surface on one side, cool interior on the other. The physics has not changed in 4.5 centuries. In 2019, a property owner in rural Shropshire, England, documented the installation of a 4-module version of this system on a stone outbuilding. The outbuilding had no electricity supply. As before measurement was zero usable electricity generated from the structure. After installation, the system produced an average of 4.2 watts per day throughout the summer months. He used this to run a single LED strip light for 8 hours a night and to keep a mobile phone charged continuously. His total material cost was £41. The system has been running without interruption for over 4 years. Now, if you live in a flat, a terraced house, or a property where ridge access is not possible, you may be thinking this does not apply to you. Stay with me, because the same bismuth telluride module and the same heat differential principle works on any surface where a temperature gradient exists. A south-facing exterior wall in summer, a metal roof panel, a single-pane window frame in full sun. The ridge mount is optimal. But the physics works wherever heat and shade meet at a surface boundary. The method adapts to your building. It does not require your building to adapt to it. Now I want to show you the documented record of how this method was kept from mainstream knowledge. The United States electricity generation and distribution industry, including investor-owned utilities and rural electric cooperatives, generates approximately $450 billion in annual revenue. A single household that reduces its grid consumption by 30% represents approximately $342 in lost annual revenue. Over the average 40-year homeownership period, that is $13,680 per household. And multiply that by the number of American homeowners, and you understand why keeping the barrier to independent generation as high as possible is not merely a preference. It is a financial necessity for that industry. In 1978, the Public Utility Regulatory Policies created the first federal framework for small-scale independent generation. That framework was deliberately written to require grid interconnection for any system above 1 kilowatt. Any system below 1 kilowatt was placed in a regulatory gray area. The National Electrical Code, updated in 1984, inserted language requiring all permanent electrical installations to meet standards that effectively excluded low-voltage thermoelectric systems from being connected to any household circuit without a licensed electrician. The language was drafted in consultation with the Edison Electric Institute, which represents investor-owned utility companies. The specific subsection is NES, Article 690, updated in the 1984 edition. The result was not an outright ban. It was something more effective than a ban. It was complexity. A homeowner who builds this system for a standalone battery application is not covered by that code restriction at all. But the language was never clarified. The ambiguity remained. And most homeowners, told by electricians that off-grid systems were complicated and potentially non-compliant, simply did not pursue them. In Glastonbury, Somerset, in 2011, a local building inspector issued a stop notice to a homeowner who had installed a ridge-mounted thermoelectric array on a listed outbuilding. The stop notice cited concerns about the structural integrity of the ridge. No structural survey was commissioned. The notice was issued from a desk. The homeowner removed the installation. The building inspector, it was later established through a Freedom of Information request filed by a local heritage group, had received technical guidance from the regional distribution network operator 3 weeks before issuing the notice. The suppression did not always come from Washington. Sometimes it came from a phone call to a local office. Before I show you the second method that doubles what this system produces, I want to tell you something that I have not said publicly before. For 19 years, I used a combination of mains electricity and bottled gas to heat and light my home and workshop in the North Riding. In those 19 years I spent, by my careful accounting, just over 16,000 pounds on energy that I generated none of myself. Every winter, I called the same heating engineer who had serviced my system since I moved in. He came every October, saw the orientation of my roof, saw the pitch, the exposure, the ridge line that catches morning sun from March through September. He said nothing, not once. I am not angry at him. I've moved past anger. But I have done the arithmetic on what his silence cost me, and I find it difficult to call it anything other than a choice. Now, the second method. This is the part most people who have looked into thermoelectric generation have not heard. The bismuth telluride module produces a small, continuous current as long as the temperature differential exists. In summer months, that differential is strong and the current is useful. In winter months, the differential at the ridge narrows and production drops significantly. The method that solves this is called a phase change thermal buffer. It uses the same physics principle that the Aboriginal Australians of the Western Desert applied to food and water storage for over 40,000 years. They discovered that certain natural materials, particularly dense clay and certain mineral salts, absorb large quantities of heat during the day and release it slowly through the night, maintaining a stable temperature differential on the cool side of any boundary. The modern application uses paraffin wax phase change material, sold in 10-kilogram blocks under the product name PCM28 or RT28 from thermal management suppliers. For approximately $9 to $14 per block, one block is packed in an insulated timber box, 12 inches square and 4 inches deep, mounted directly beneath the aluminum heat sink on the cool side. The wax absorbs heat conducted through from the warm side during peak sun hours. As the sun drops and the ridge cools, the wax releases that stored heat slowly back toward the heat sink. The differential is maintained for 3 to 5 additional hours past sunset. Evening generation is from a passive system with no moving parts. The combined cost of the thermoelectric module array and the phase change buffer is between $28 and $34 in materials. Properly installed combined system produces an average of 11 to 14 watts per day across a full 12-month period in a temperate climate. That is enough to run LED lighting throughout a home for the full evening and to keep critical low-draw devices charged continuously, entirely without a grid connection for those loads. In 2021, a permaculture homestead in rural New South Wales documented this combined installation on a timber field shelter. The shelter is used year-round for seed storage and small-scale food processing. The combined system has maintained continuous lighting and a small circulation fan for the seed drying process without grid connection for over 3 years. Their recorded daily average across all seasons is 12.4 watts. Their total installation cost was $51 Australian dollars. The knowledge that sits in that $18 Ridge device did not disappear by accident. The 1984 National Electrical Code revision was not a coincidence of timing. It arrived 4 years after the first serious federal discussion of small-scale independent generation. A specific subcommittee of the National Fire Protection Association, which administers the NEC, reviewed and declined to include language that would have explicitly permitted low-voltage thermoelectric installations as exempt from interconnection requirements. That subcommittee included 3 representatives from investor-owned utility companies. Their names are in the public meeting record. The meeting was in November 1983. They voted. And because of how they voted, an $18 device that works on physics that the Romans understood 2,000 years ago has spent 4 decades being invisible to the people who needed it most. You did not fail to find this. You were kept from finding it by named people in a named meeting for a reason measured in billions of dollars of annual revenue. And now you have it. If you have read your last electricity bill, go to the comments and tell me the exact dollar amount of your most recent monthly charge. Not a range. The number. I am compiling documented reader figures to establish a real baseline for what this technology could remove from the average household's annual outgoings. Your figure will help the next person who watches this understand exactly what is at stake. The next video in this series covers a water retention method that 3 major municipal water authorities in the United Kingdom attempted to have classified as a prohibited installation in 2003. They lobbied the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management to include specific language in the 2004 guidance revision that would have required a licensed contractor to be present for any implementation. The revision went through, language went in, and the method, which costs less than $20 and eliminates a significant portion of household water costs permanently, became officially invisible. They did not succeed in bearing it, because the original documentation exists in archives that predate their intervention. And what those archives contain is something I think you should not go another month without knowing. Subscribe now so you are not the last person to find out.